Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that Texas Instruments is experiencing a high volume of applications for critical engineering roles, leading to significant delays in the hiring process. A hiring manager proposes expediting the background check and qualification verification for candidates who score exceptionally high on the initial assessment, suggesting that their strong performance on the test implies a reduced risk of noncompliance with other hiring criteria. Option A. Implement a streamlined but comprehensive verification process for all candidates, ensuring that even high-scoring individuals undergo thorough background checks and qualification validation according to established Texas Instruments hiring assessment guidelines. Option B. Request a temporary waiver from the standard background check and qualification verification procedures for all candidates until the application backlog is cleared. Option C. Focus solely on the technical assessment scores for initial screening and defer all background checks and qualification verifications to a later stage of employment. Option D. Expedite the background check and qualification verification for high-scoring candidates, relying primarily on their assessment scores as an indicator of overall suitability and compliance. The correct answer is A. Implement a streamlined but comprehensive verification process for all candidates, ensuring that even high-scoring individuals undergo thorough background checks and qualification validation, according to established Texas Instruments hiring assessment guidelines. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with strict adherence to regulatory compliance, specifically within the context of the Texas Instruments hiring assessment tests' implied regulatory framework. The pressure to fill roles quickly can lead to shortcuts, but compromising on compliance can have severe repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all hiring processes, including background checks and candidate qualifications, meet the established standards without undue delay. The correct approach involves a thorough review of candidate qualifications and background checks against the specific requirements and guidelines relevant to the Texas Instruments hiring assessment test jurisdiction. This ensures that all candidates meet the necessary criteria, mitigating legal and reputational risks. This approach is ethically sound and compliant because it prioritizes fairness, accuracy, and adherence to the established assessment framework, preventing potential discrimination claims and ensuring the integrity of the hiring process. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately reviews candidate qualifications and background checks is professionally unacceptable. This failure to adhere to established protocols can lead to hiring unqualified individuals, which can impact team performance and potentially expose Texas Instruments to legal liabilities if the hiring process is found to be discriminatory or negligent. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in verifying candidate credentials, such as accepting self-reported information without independent verification, directly violates the principles of due diligence and regulatory compliance. This can result in misrepresentation by candidates and a flawed hiring decision, undermining the credibility of the assessment process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements of the hiring assessment. This involves clearly defining what constitutes a qualified candidate and what verification processes are mandated. When faced with time pressures, the framework should prioritize seeking clarification or additional resources to ensure compliance rather than deviating from established procedures. A risk-based approach, where potential compliance failures are identified and mitigated proactively, is crucial. This involves regular training on compliance protocols and fostering a culture where raising concerns about potential breaches is encouraged. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a candidate pool exhibiting adverse impact on a specific demographic group if the current Texas Instruments hiring assessment is used without further validation. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation while adhering to U.S. employment law and ethical hiring practices? Option A. Immediately halt the use of the current assessment and initiate a comprehensive validation study to ensure its job-relatedness and assess for adverse impact, potentially delaying the hiring process. Option B. Implement the current assessment but instruct hiring managers to use their discretion to balance the assessment results with other qualitative factors to mitigate perceived disparities. Option C. Rely on the assessment vendor's assurance that the tool is compliant with all U.S. employment laws, without conducting an independent review of its potential impact on the specific candidate pool. Option D. Proceed with the current assessment as planned, assuming the business need for rapid hiring outweighs potential demographic disparities, and address any concerns post-hire. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the current assessment as planned, assuming the business need for rapid hiring outweighs potential demographic disparities, and address any concerns post-hire. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing business objectives with ethical conduct and adherence to regulatory frameworks, specifically those governing hiring practices and data privacy, within the context of a U.S.-based hiring assessment for Texas Instruments. The pressure to fill a critical role quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise fairness and compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment process is not only effective in identifying qualified candidates, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the assessment's validity and reliability, ensuring it aligns with Texas Instruments' internal policies and relevant U.S. employment laws, such as the Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures, UGESP. This approach prioritizes fairness, non-discrimination, and the ability of the assessment to accurately predict job performance. By focusing on job relatedness and avoiding disparate impact, this method upholds ethical hiring standards and mitigates legal risks. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the assessment's perceived efficiency without independent validation risks violating anti-discrimination laws. If the assessment disproportionately screens out candidates from protected groups, even unintentionally, it can lead to legal challenges. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness by skipping the review of potential biases or adverse impact data ignores the ethical imperative to provide equal employment opportunities and the legal requirement to ensure selection procedures are job-related and do not have an unlawful discriminatory effect. A third incorrect approach that focuses on anecdotal evidence of success without systematic data analysis fails to establish a defensible basis for the assessment's use, leaving Texas Instruments vulnerable to claims of unfair hiring practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the purpose and legal context of the hiring assessment. This involves consulting relevant U.S. employment law and internal company policy. The next step is to critically evaluate the assessment's design and proposed use, looking for evidence of validity, reliability, and absence of adverse impact. If concerns arise, further investigation, consultation with legal counsel or HR experts, and potentially modification or replacement of the assessment are necessary. The ultimate decision should be guided by a commitment to fair, equitable, and legally compliant hiring practices, even if it requires more time or resources. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that hiring a candidate with exceptional technical skills for a critical role at Texas Instruments could accelerate project timelines, but concerns have been raised about their past adherence to company policies. Which approach best balances the potential benefits with the inherent risks? Option A. Dismiss the candidate immediately due to the reported policy violation, without further investigation or providing an opportunity for explanation. Option B. Hire the candidate but assign them to a role with minimal policy oversight, effectively isolating them from potential compliance issues. Option C. Hire the candidate immediately based on their strong technical skills, assuming any policy issues can be addressed through future training and onboarding. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive background check and thorough reference verification, specifically inquiring about the candidate's history of policy adherence and ethical conduct before making a final decision. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive background check and thorough reference verification, specifically inquiring about the candidate's history of policy adherence and ethical conduct before making a final decision. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in hiring where a candidate possesses strong technical skills but raises concerns regarding adherence to company policies and ethical conduct. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for talent with the long-term risks associated with a candidate who may not align with Texas Instruments' values and compliance standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overlooking a potentially valuable employee and hiring someone who could jeopardize the company's reputation or legal standing. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough background check and reference verification that specifically probes the candidate's past adherence to company policies and ethical guidelines. This is crucial because Texas Instruments, like any publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory frameworks, including those governing employment practices and corporate conduct. A comprehensive check, extending beyond basic qualifications, ensures that the hiring decision is informed by a holistic understanding of the candidate's reliability and integrity. This aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain a compliant and trustworthy workforce and the regulatory expectation for due diligence in hiring. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the candidate's technical proficiency and overlooking the policy adherence concerns, is an incorrect approach. This failure stems from a disregard for the potential risks associated with a candidate who has demonstrated a pattern of policy violations. Such a candidate could expose Texas Instruments to legal liabilities, reputational damage, and internal compliance issues. It neglects the ethical responsibility to foster a culture of compliance and the practical need to mitigate foreseeable risks. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the candidate outright based on a single, unverified report of policy violation without further investigation. Caution is warranted. A hasty dismissal without due process or an opportunity for the candidate to explain or refute the information can lead to unfair hiring practices and potentially losing a valuable employee who may have a valid explanation or has since corrected their behavior. This approach lacks the professional rigor of a balanced assessment. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with hiring while downplaying the policy concerns, assuming they can be addressed through future training. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to upholding company policies and creates an environment where non-compliance might be tolerated. This can lead to a slippery slope, undermining the integrity of internal controls and potentially leading to more serious breaches down the line, which could attract regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment with ethical considerations. This involves 1. Information gathering. Collect all relevant information about the candidate, including technical skills, experience, and any reported behavioral or policy issues. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential impact of any identified issues on the role, the team, and the company's overall compliance and reputation. 3. Due diligence. Conduct thorough background checks and reference verifications, specifically addressing any concerns raised. 4. Balanced evaluation. Weigh the candidate's strengths against the identified risks, considering the severity and recency of any policy violations. 5. Ethical and regulatory compliance. Ensure the decision aligns with Texas Instruments' Code of Conduct, employment laws, and ethical standards. 6. Documentation. Maintain clear records of the decision-making process and the rationale behind the final hiring decision. Question 4. Investigation of how a departing Texas Instruments engineer should ethically and legally present their past project contributions to a prospective employer, considering the company's proprietary information policies and Texas trade secret laws. Option A. Seek guidance from Texas Instruments' legal department or HR on how to appropriately discuss past work experience during a job search. Option B. Share detailed project specifications and unreleased product designs with the prospective employer to fully showcase past accomplishments. Option C. Assume that all knowledge gained during employment is personal intellectual property and can be freely shared. Option D. Discuss general technical challenges and solutions encountered at Texas Instruments, avoiding specific project names but revealing strategic insights. The correct answer is B. Share detailed project specifications and unreleased product designs with the prospective employer to fully showcase past accomplishments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas Instruments employee regarding the ethical handling of proprietary information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's need to protect its intellectual property with the employee's personal desire to leverage their acquired knowledge for future career opportunities. Misjudging this balance can lead to severe legal and ethical repercussions for both the individual and Texas Instruments. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between permissible knowledge sharing and impermissible disclosure of trade secrets. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves understanding and adhering to Texas Instruments' established policies on intellectual property and confidentiality, as well as relevant Texas state laws concerning trade secrets. This approach prioritizes the protection of company assets by ensuring that any information shared is either publicly available or has been explicitly cleared for disclosure. It aligns with the ethical obligation of employees to act in the best interest of their employer and to safeguard confidential information. This is justified by Texas Uniform Trade Secrets Act, TUTSA, which defines trade secrets broadly and provides remedies for misappropriation, and by Texas Instruments' own internal codes of conduct and employment agreements that typically outline strict confidentiality clauses. Incorrect approach is analysis. Sharing detailed project specifications and unreleased product designs with a potential future employer, even if framed as demonstrating past experience, constitutes a direct violation of confidentiality agreements and likely misappropriation of trade secrets under TUTSA. This approach fails to recognize that such information is proprietary and not publicly available. Discussing general technical challenges and solutions encountered at Texas Instruments without referencing specific project details or proprietary data, but still revealing insights into the company's strategic direction or technological approaches, risks crossing the line into disclosure of confidential information. While seemingly less direct, can still provide a competitive advantage to a rival or future employer, potentially violating the spirit, if not the letter, of confidentiality obligations. Seeking advice from Texas Instruments' legal department, or HR, on how to appropriately discuss past work experience during a job search demonstrates a proactive and responsible approach. This method ensures that any information shared is compliant with company policy and legal requirements, thereby mitigating risk for both the employee and the company. It reflects an understanding of the importance of ethical conduct and adherence to legal frameworks governing intellectual property. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should first consult their company's employee handbook, code of conduct, and any specific confidentiality or intellectual property agreements they have signed. If there is any ambiguity, the next step should be to seek clarification from the appropriate internal departments, such as legal or human resources. This proactive approach ensures that actions are aligned with both company policy and legal obligations, fostering a culture of integrity and risk mitigation. Question 5. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a position at Texas Instruments has a close personal friendship with one of the interviewers scheduled to participate in the evaluation. Which of the following approaches best upholds the integrity of the hiring process? Option A. The candidate should withdraw from the assessment process immediately without informing Texas Instruments of the reason for their withdrawal. Option B. The candidate should proceed with the interview, assuming the personal friendship will not influence their performance or the interviewer's judgment. Option C. The candidate should subtly hint at the personal relationship during the interview to establish rapport, without explicitly stating it as a conflict. Option D. The candidate should inform the Texas Instruments hiring manager or HR department about the personal relationship prior to the interview, allowing them to assess and manage any potential conflict of interest. The correct answer is D. The candidate should inform the Texas Instruments hiring manager or HR department about the personal relationship prior to the interview, allowing them to assess and manage any potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain ethical standards while representing Texas Instruments. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that all actions taken during the assessment process are transparent, fair, and free from any undue influence or perception of impropriety. Careful judgment is required to uphold Texas Instruments' reputation and adhere to the principles of a fair hiring process. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing any potential conflicts of interest to the hiring manager or HR department at Texas Instruments. This demonstrates integrity and a commitment to ethical conduct. By bringing the situation to light, the candidate allows Texas Instruments to assess the situation and implement appropriate measures to mitigate any perceived bias, such as assigning a different interviewer or ensuring that the interview focuses solely on the candidate's qualifications and suitability for the role. This approach aligns with general ethical business practices and the implied expectation of honesty and transparency in professional interactions, particularly within a hiring context. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the interview without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose creates a significant ethical breach. It undermines the integrity of the hiring process by introducing a hidden bias, whether intentional or unintentional. Texas Instruments would be unaware of a potential conflict, preventing them from taking necessary steps to ensure fairness. This lack of transparency can lead to a perception of favoritism or an unfair advantage for the candidate, damaging trust and potentially leading to legal or reputational repercussions for Texas Instruments. Another incorrect approach is to assume the relationship will not influence the interview and therefore not disclose it. This is a flawed assumption. Even with the best intentions, personal relationships can unconsciously affect judgment. The ethical failure here is the failure to recognize and act upon the potential for unconscious bias. Professional decision-making in such situations requires acknowledging that even subtle influences can compromise the fairness of a process. A final incorrect approach is to withdraw from the assessment process entirely without explanation. While this avoids the direct conflict, it is not the most professionally constructive approach. The ethical failure lies in not providing Texas Instruments with the opportunity to manage the situation appropriately. A more professional response would be to disclose and allow the company to make an informed decision about how to proceed. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a commitment to transparency, integrity, and fairness. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step is to identify it. The next step is to assess the nature and severity of the conflict. Then, the professional should proactively communicate the conflict to the relevant parties, in this case, Texas Instruments hiring manager or HR. This communication should be clear, concise, and focused on enabling the organization to make an informed decision to ensure the integrity of the process. Question 6. The audit findings indicate that Texas Instruments has implemented a new financial reporting system that, while innovative, contains several significant control deficiencies that could lead to material misstatements. The audit team is concerned that reporting these deficiencies in detail might jeopardize their firm's lucrative ongoing relationship with Texas Instruments, potentially impacting future audit engagements. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the audit team? Option A. Document all identified control deficiencies thoroughly and communicate them directly to the appropriate levels of management within Texas Instruments, adhering to professional auditing standards for reporting. Option B. Discuss the significant control deficiencies informally with a junior manager at Texas Instruments, without formal documentation or escalation to senior leadership, to gauge their reaction before committing to a formal report. Option C. Delay the formal reporting of the significant control deficiencies until after the next financial reporting cycle, allowing Texas Instruments time to potentially rectify them without formal audit scrutiny. Option D. Minimize the reporting of the control deficiencies, highlighting only minor issues and omitting the most significant ones to preserve the client relationship and secure future business. The correct answer is A. Document all identified control deficiencies thoroughly and communicate them directly to the appropriate levels of management within Texas Instruments, adhering to professional auditing standards for reporting. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between maintaining client relationships and upholding ethical reporting standards. The pressure to present a favorable outcome for Texas Instruments, a key client, could tempt an auditor to overlook or downplay significant findings. However, the auditor's primary ethical and professional obligation is to report findings accurately and without bias, regardless of the client's status or potential impact on future business. This requires a commitment to integrity and objectivity, even when faced with difficult circumstances. The correct approach involves transparently and thoroughly documenting the identified control deficiencies and communicating them directly to the appropriate management levels within Texas Instruments, as per standard auditing practices and ethical codes of conduct. This upholds the auditor's duty to provide an objective assessment of the control environment. Regulatory frameworks for auditing, such as those promulgated by the AICPA, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, for private companies, or the PKIA, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, for public companies in the U.S., mandate such transparency and accuracy in reporting. Adhering to these standards ensures the reliability of audit reports and maintains public trust in the auditing profession. An incorrect approach of minimizing or omitting the findings to avoid upsetting Texas Instruments would be a direct violation of the auditor's ethical duty of integrity and objectivity. This failure to report accurately could mislead stakeholders about the true state of the company's internal controls, potentially leading to greater risks and losses down the line. Furthermore, it breaches professional auditing standards that require comprehensive reporting of all material control weaknesses. Another incorrect approach of delaying the reporting of findings until after the next business cycle, hoping for improvements, is also professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a lack of due professional care and potentially a concealment of material information. Auditing standards require timely communication of significant findings to allow management to address them promptly. Finally, an incorrect approach of only discussing the findings informally with a junior manager at Texas Instruments, without formal documentation or escalation, fails to meet the requirements for proper communication and remediation. This informal approach lacks accountability and does not ensure that the findings reach the individuals with the authority to implement necessary changes, thereby undermining the purpose of the audit. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the ethical imperative to report truthfully. They should then consult relevant professional standards and internal firm policies regarding the communication of audit findings. The decision-making process should involve a clear understanding of the auditor's responsibilities, a commitment to objectivity, and a structured approach to documenting and communicating findings to the appropriate levels of management, if necessary, to oversight bodies, ensuring that the audit serves its intended purpose of providing assurance and driving improvement. Question 7. When evaluating the development process for a new Texas Instruments product and facing a tight deadline, what is the most responsible approach to managing sensitive customer data used in the project's testing phase? Option A. Rely on informal assurances from the data source regarding data quality and skip formal validation steps to save time. Option B. Temporarily disable certain data security protocols to expedite data access and processing for testing purposes. Option C. Prioritize the timely completion of testing by using the data as is, assuming its integrity for the sake of speed. Option D. Implement robust data validation and security checks on the customer data before and during its use in testing, even if it adds time to the schedule. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the timely completion of testing by using the data as is, assuming its integrity for the sake of speed. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a critical project with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations of Texas Instruments. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise data integrity and compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with the company's commitment to ethical conduct and adherence to relevant regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity and security of the data throughout the development lifecycle, even under time constraints. This aligns with general principles of responsible data handling and the implied regulatory expectations for any company operating in the technology sector, which often include data privacy and security standards. While specific Texas Instruments internal policies are paramount, the ethical imperative to protect sensitive information and maintain accurate records is universally recognized and often codified in broader legal frameworks governing business operations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering data validation introduces significant risks. This could lead to flawed product performance, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions if the compromised data impacts customers or partners. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established security protocols, even for internal testing, exposes Texas Instruments to cyber threats and violates the trust placed in the company to safeguard its information assets. A third incorrect approach that neglects proper documentation of the data handling process creates an audit trail deficiency, making it difficult to demonstrate compliance or troubleshoot issues, and potentially violating internal governance and external reporting requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that first identifies all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Then, they should assess the potential risks and benefits of each course of action, explicitly considering regulatory compliance, ethical implications, and company policy. When faced with conflicting priorities, such as speed versus thoroughness, professionals should seek guidance from supervisors or relevant departments, e.g., legal compliance, to ensure decisions are well-informed and defensible. The principle of doing the right thing should guide all actions, even when under pressure. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that Texas Instruments is developing a groundbreaking new semiconductor technology that could significantly alter the market landscape. A key supplier has requested early access to detailed specifications to optimize their production processes. What is the most appropriate course of action for Texas Instruments to take regarding the disclosure of this proprietary, non-public information? Option A. Grant the supplier access to all technical specifications immediately, trusting their commitment to confidentiality and their understanding of the competitive implications. Option B. Provide the supplier with detailed specifications under a strict, legally binding non-disclosure agreement, ensuring the information is used solely for production optimization and not for any other purpose. Option C. Share the general concept of the new technology with the supplier, emphasizing its potential impact, but withholding specific technical details until a public announcement is imminent. Option D. Inform the supplier that Texas Instruments cannot share any non-public information and suggest they wait for the official product announcement before making any adjustments. The correct answer is B. Provide the supplier with detailed specifications under a strict, legally binding non-disclosure agreement, ensuring the information is used solely for production optimization and not for any other purpose. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to leverage its intellectual property for competitive advantage and the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure fair market practices and prevent insider trading. Texas Instruments, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulations designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in balancing proprietary information management with compliance requirements. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business strategy and potentially illegal or unethical information dissemination. The correct approach involves a rigorous internal review process that prioritizes compliance with securities laws and ethical guidelines. This approach acknowledges that while Texas Instruments has a right to its proprietary information, its disclosure must be managed in a way that does not provide an unfair advantage to any specific group or individual, thereby preventing market manipulation or insider trading. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and investor protection mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing publicly traded companies. An incorrect approach that involves sharing early-stage, non-public product development details with a select group of external partners without a clear, legally compliant disclosure mechanism would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be construed as providing material non-public information, leading to insider trading violations and undermining market fairness. Another incorrect approach, such as broadly disseminating sensitive competitive strategy information to the public without proper context or timing, could also be problematic, potentially causing undue market volatility or revealing strategic weaknesses prematurely. Finally, an approach that ignores the potential for information leakage and relies solely on informal assurances of confidentiality from partners would be a failure to implement robust compliance controls, leaving Texas Instruments vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the nature of the information in question. Is it material and non-public? Next, they must assess the potential impact of its disclosure on market fairness and investor confidence. This should be followed by consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations, and if necessary, seeking guidance from legal and compliance departments. The decision should always err on the side of caution, prioritizing transparency and compliance over potential short-term competitive gains derived from information asymmetry. Question 9. Analysis of how Texas Instruments can optimize its internal financial reporting process to improve efficiency without compromising accuracy or regulatory compliance. Option A. Expedite the financial reporting process by reducing the number of review checkpoints and relying on automated data entry without manual verification to meet aggressive quarterly deadlines. Option B. Focus solely on reducing the time spent on data reconciliation, even if it means accepting a higher tolerance for minor discrepancies in the financial statements. Option C. Introduce new software tools for financial reporting based on market trends without conducting a comprehensive assessment of their compatibility with existing Texas Instruments systems and regulatory reporting standards. Option D. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a thorough documentation of current workflows, identifying key performance indicators, KPI, for efficiency and accuracy, and then piloting proposed changes with rigorous testing and stakeholder feedback, ensuring alignment with SEC regulations and SOX internal control requirements. The correct answer is D. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a thorough documentation of current workflows, identifying key performance indicators, KPI, for efficiency and accuracy, and then piloting proposed changes with rigorous testing and stakeholder feedback, ensuring alignment with SEC regulations and SOX internal control requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Texas Instruments, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning its financial reporting and internal controls. The pressure to meet quarterly earnings targets can create an environment where shortcuts or misinterpretations of processes might seem appealing, but adherence to established procedures and ethical guidelines is paramount. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic review and documentation of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing data-driven improvements that align with Texas Instruments' internal policies and relevant U.S. securities regulations, such as those enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. This approach prioritizes accuracy, compliance, and sustainable efficiency. It ensures that any process optimization does not inadvertently lead to misstatements in financial reports or violations of internal control frameworks like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX). An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on data integrity or regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, bypassing established validation steps in a financial reporting process to accelerate its completion could lead to errors that violate SEC reporting requirements and SOX mandates for internal controls. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion rather than objective analysis and testing. This lacks the rigor required by regulatory bodies and could result in inefficient or non-compliant processes. A third incorrect approach could be to ignore feedback from relevant departments, such as legal or compliance, during the optimization process. This failure to consult with stakeholders who understand the regulatory landscape can lead to the adoption of flawed or non-compliant solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the current state, identifying objectives, and then evaluating potential solutions against established regulatory requirements, ethical standards, and internal company policies. This involves seeking input from all relevant departments, conducting thorough risk assessments, and prioritizing solutions that enhance both efficiency and compliance. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that a new, proprietary assessment tool developed internally by Texas Instruments shows promise in significantly reducing the time required to screen entry-level engineering candidates. However, concerns have been raised regarding its potential impact on candidates from diverse backgrounds. Which approach should the Texas Instruments hiring assessment team prioritize when evaluating this new tool? Option A. Focus primarily on the cost savings and time reduction benefits of the new assessment tool, assuming that internal development inherently ensures fairness. Option B. Prioritize a comprehensive review of the assessment tool against Texas employment laws and federal anti-discrimination statutes, ensuring it is job-related, validated, and free from adverse impact on protected groups. Option C. Implement the new assessment tool immediately to capitalize on its efficiency gains, with a plan to address any potential compliance issues retrospectively if they arise. Option D. Rely on anecdotal feedback from hiring managers about the tool's perceived effectiveness and ease of use to justify its adoption. The correct answer is B. Prioritize a comprehensive review of the assessment tool against Texas employment laws and federal anti-discrimination statutes, ensuring it is job-related, validated, and free from adverse impact on protected groups. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Texas Instruments' hiring assessment team by requiring them to balance the need for efficient candidate evaluation with the imperative to adhere strictly to the established regulatory framework for hiring assessments in Texas. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying these regulations to a novel assessment tool, ensuring fairness, validity, and compliance without introducing bias or discriminatory practices. Careful judgment is required to avoid inadvertently creating an assessment that, while efficient, could violate state or federal employment laws. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed assessment tool against the Texas Labor Code and any relevant federal employment laws, such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as interpreted by Texas courts and administrative bodies. This includes verifying that the assessment is job-related and consistent with business necessity, as mandated by employment law principles. The team must ensure the assessment does not disproportionately screen out individuals from protected classes, unless the disparity is justified by business necessity, and no less discriminatory alternative exists. This approach upholds legal compliance and ethical hiring practices by prioritizing fairness and equal opportunity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Adopting an assessment tool solely based on its perceived efficiency without rigorous validation against legal requirements is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to discriminatory hiring practices, violating Texas Labor Code provisions against unfair employment practices and potentially federal anti-discrimination laws. Such an approach prioritizes speed over fairness and legal adherence, exposing Texas instruments to legal challenges, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Implementing an assessment that relies on subjective criteria or anecdotal evidence of effectiveness, rather than empirical data and legal scrutiny, also constitutes a failure. This approach lacks the objective validation required by employment law and can easily introduce unconscious bias, leading to disparate impact on protected groups. It bypasses the due diligence necessary to ensure the assessment is a legitimate measure of job-related skills and not a pretext for discrimination. Focusing on the cost-effectiveness of the assessment without a corresponding evaluation of its legal compliance and fairness is another critical failure. While cost is a business consideration, it cannot supersede legal obligations to conduct non-discriminatory hiring. An inexpensive but legally flawed assessment is ultimately more costly due to potential litigation and reputational harm. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with developing or implementing hiring assessments must adopt a framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical considerations above all else. This involves 1. Understanding the relevant legal landscape. Thoroughly familiarize oneself with federal and state employment laws, including anti-discrimination statutes and regulations governing hiring practices. 2. Job-relatedness and business necessity. Ensure all assessment components directly relate to the essential functions of the job and are demonstrably necessary for successful performance. 3. Validation studies. Conduct or review validation studies to confirm the assessment's predictive validity and ensure it does not have an adverse impact on protected groups. 4. Bias review. Actively seek to identify and mitigate potential biases within the assessment tool. 5. Legal counsel consultation. Engage legal counsel to review assessment tools and practices to ensure compliance. 6. Continuous monitoring. Regularly review assessment effectiveness and legal compliance, making adjustments as needed. Question 11. Compliance review shows that a Texas Instruments engineer is being considered for a significant project that involves a vendor with whom the engineer's spouse has a close personal friendship and a history of business dealings. The engineer is aware of this connection. Option A. The engineer should discuss the situation with their spouse and the vendor to ensure they will not be influenced, and then proceed with the project. Option B. The engineer should immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to their direct manager and the Texas Instruments Compliance Department, seeking guidance on how to proceed with the project. Option C. The engineer should proceed with the project as planned, assuming the personal friendship will not influence their professional judgment. Option D. The engineer should inform their direct manager about the situation, but proceed with the project unless explicitly told not to. The correct answer is B. The engineer should immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to their direct manager and the Texas Instruments Compliance Department, seeking guidance on how to proceed with the project. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee at Texas Instruments to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise, impacting the company's integrity and compliance with its own internal policies and potentially external regulations governing business conduct. The employee must exercise sound judgment to uphold ethical standards and prevent any perception of impropriety. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal channels at Texas Instruments. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and adherence to the company's code of conduct and ethics policies. By seeking guidance and approval before proceeding, the employee ensures that any potential conflict is managed appropriately, safeguarding Texas Instruments from reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny. This aligns with the ethical principle of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety and prioritizing the company's best interests. An incorrect approach of proceeding without disclosure risks violating Texas Instruments' internal policies on conflicts of interest. This could lead to disciplinary action, including termination, and could also expose Texas Instruments to risks if the undisclosed relationship influences business decisions in a way that is not in the company's best interest or violates any applicable laws or regulations related to fair business practices. Another incorrect approach of seeking advice from a colleague outside of the designated compliance or legal department, while potentially well-intentioned, bypasses the formal reporting structure designed to handle such matters. This can lead to inconsistent advice and does not provide the necessary documentation or official approval required by Texas Instruments' internal controls. Finally, an incorrect approach of assuming the relationship is insignificant and therefore requires no disclosure overlooks the importance of Texas Instruments' comprehensive conflict of interest policies, which often have a low threshold for reporting to ensure thorough oversight. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves 1. Identifying a potential conflict, 2. Consulting relevant company policies and codes of conduct, 3. Disclosing the situation to the designated authority, e.g., manager, compliance officer. 4. Seeking clear guidance and approval before taking any action. 5. Documenting the process and outcome. Question 12. Research into the appropriate handling of potentially sensitive, non-public technical data developed during employment at Texas Instruments. A former colleague now working for a competitor has inquired about specific methodologies. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the current Texas Instruments employee? Option A. Strictly adhere to Texas Instruments' established policies on intellectual property and confidentiality, and consult the company's legal department for guidance before responding to any inquiries about proprietary information. Option B. Utilize the information to assist the former colleague in a way that might indirectly benefit Texas Instruments through a future collaborative opportunity without explicit company approval. Option C. Share the information with the former colleague, explaining that it is a matter of general industry knowledge and that such professional courtesy is common. Option D. Assume the information is no longer proprietary due to its age and share it freely, as it is unlikely to cause harm to Texas Instruments. The correct answer is A. Strictly adhere to Texas Instruments' established policies on intellectual property and confidentiality, and consult the company's legal department for guidance before responding to any inquiries about proprietary information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas Instruments employee regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of using proprietary information. The core challenge lies in balancing the company's need to protect its intellectual property with the individual's responsibility to act ethically and in accordance with applicable laws. Misinterpreting or misapplying these principles can lead to severe consequences, including legal penalties, reputational damage for both the individual and Texas Instruments, and loss of competitive advantage. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of intellectual property rights and ethical conduct within the corporate environment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Texas Instruments' established policies on intellectual property and confidentiality, and seeking guidance from the legal department when in doubt. This is the most professionally sound and ethically defensible course of action because it directly aligns with the regulatory framework governing intellectual property in the United States, which emphasizes the protection of trade secrets and proprietary information. By following company policy and consulting legal experts, the employee ensures that their actions are compliant with federal and state laws, such as the Defend Trade Secrets Act and relevant Texas statutes, and uphold the ethical obligation to safeguard company assets. This proactive step mitigates risk and demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that involves sharing the information with a former colleague at a competitor company, even if framed as a friendly gesture or knowledge sharing, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action directly violates intellectual property laws and Texas Instruments confidentiality agreements, potentially leading to claims of trade secret misappropriation and unfair competition. It also breaches the ethical duty of loyalty to the employer. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that the information is no longer proprietary simply because it was developed some time ago. Intellectual property rights, including trade secrets, can persist as long as the information remains confidential and provides a competitive edge. Disregarding the proprietary nature of the information without proper verification constitutes negligence and a failure to uphold legal and ethical obligations. Finally, an approach that involves using the information for personal gain or to benefit a new venture without explicit authorization from Texas Instruments is a clear violation of intellectual property law and ethical conduct. This constitutes unauthorized use and potential misappropriation of trade secrets, exposing both the individual and potentially the new venture to legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance, ethical conduct, and risk mitigation. This framework involves 1. Understanding and internalizing company policies related to intellectual property and confidentiality. 2. Recognizing the legal landscape governing proprietary information in the relevant jurisdiction, in this case, the United States. 3. Consulting internal resources, such as the legal department, when any ambiguity or uncertainty arises. 4. Acting with integrity and prioritizing the long-term interests of the employer and adherence to legal and ethical standards over short-term personal or external pressures. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates the capability to collect granular data on employee keystrokes, application usage, and idle time. Texas Instruments is considering deploying this system across its workforce to identify productivity bottlenecks and areas for process improvement. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential legal and ethical implications of this deployment under U.S. regulatory frameworks? Option A. Focus solely on the technical feasibility and potential productivity gains of the monitoring system, assuming that any data collected will be used for legitimate business purposes and therefore falls outside the scope of significant privacy concerns. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment involving legal counsel to identify all applicable U.S. federal and state privacy laws, evaluate potential risks to employee privacy, and develop mitigation strategies, including clear employee notification and data minimization practices, before full deployment. Option C. Proceed with the deployment of the monitoring system, relying on existing general company IT usage policies, and address any specific privacy concerns that may arise after the system is operational. Option D. Implement the monitoring system with basic security measures, assuming that employee consent is implicitly granted by virtue of their employment with Texas Instruments, and defer detailed legal review until a specific complaint is filed. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment involving legal counsel to identify all applicable U.S. federal and state privacy laws, evaluate potential risks to employee privacy, and develop mitigation strategies, including clear employee notification and data minimization practices, before full deployment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's need for operational efficiency and data-driven decision-making with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive employee information. Texas Instruments, as a U.S.-based company, operates under a complex web of federal and state privacy laws, as well as industry best practices. The core challenge lies in interpreting and applying these regulations to a novel technological implementation, ensuring that data collection and analysis do not infringe upon employee rights or create undue risk. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreach while still deriving meaningful insights. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that proactively identifies potential privacy risks associated with the monitoring system. This assessment should involve legal counsel and relevant stakeholders to ensure all applicable U.S. federal and state privacy laws, such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, if applicable to employee data, and general principles of data minimization and purpose limitation are considered. The assessment should lead to the implementation of robust data security measures, clear employee notification policies, and mechanisms for data access and deletion requests, aligning with principles of data privacy by design and by default. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, demonstrating a commitment to employee privacy and responsible data handling. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical capabilities of the monitoring system, without considering the legal and ethical implications, fails to acknowledge the regulatory landscape. This could lead to violations of privacy laws, resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and loss of employee trust. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by neglecting thorough risk mitigation and employee communication would be equally problematic. This demonstrates a disregard for employee rights and a failure to adhere to best practices in data governance, potentially exposing Texas Instruments to legal challenges and regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach that assumes existing general data protection policies are sufficient without a specific review for this new system risks overlooking unique vulnerabilities and compliance gaps, leading to unintended consequences. Professionals should adopt a proactive, risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying the specific data being collected and its intended use. 2. Researching and understanding all relevant U.S. federal and state privacy laws and regulations applicable to employee data. 3. Conducting a thorough privacy impact assessment to identify potential risks and mitigation strategies. 4. Consulting with legal counsel and privacy experts. 5. Developing clear policies and procedures for data handling, security, and employee notification. 6. Implementing technical and organizational safeguards. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the system and policies to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that employees in technology firms often face dilemmas regarding the use of proprietary information for personal development or external professional networking. For an employee at Texas Instruments, what is the most appropriate course of action when considering leveraging insights gained from internal projects for a personal coding portfolio without directly copying code or sensitive data? Option A. Proceed with using general insights and concepts learned from internal projects, as long as no direct proprietary code or sensitive data is copied, assuming this falls under general professional knowledge. Option B. Assume that any knowledge gained during employment at Texas Instruments is fair game for personal use and professional development, as long as it is not directly attributable to specific confidential documents. Option C. Share the general insights and concepts with trusted colleagues in professional networking groups to gauge their understanding and potential applicability, assuming this is a form of collaborative learning. Option D. Seek explicit written authorization from Texas Instruments' legal or management department before incorporating any insights or concepts derived from internal projects into a personal coding portfolio. Correct answer is A. Proceed with using general insights and concepts learned from internal projects, as long as no direct proprietary code or sensitive data is copied, assuming this falls under general professional knowledge. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas Instruments employee regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of using proprietary information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's need to protect its intellectual property with the employee's personal or professional development aspirations. Misjudging the boundaries of acceptable information use can lead to severe legal repercussions for both the individual and Texas Instruments, as well as damage to the company's reputation and competitive standing. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between general industry knowledge and specific, confidential Texas Instruments data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Texas Instruments' established policies on intellectual property and confidentiality, and seeking explicit authorization before using any proprietary information for external purposes, even for personal learning or professional networking. This aligns with the legal and ethical obligations to protect trade secrets and confidential business information, as mandated by Texas state law and federal regulations governing intellectual property. Specifically, Texas law protects trade secrets, and unauthorized disclosure or use can result in civil liability. Ethically, respecting company policies demonstrates integrity and trustworthiness, crucial for maintaining professional relationships and upholding the company's competitive advantage. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to assume that general knowledge gained from working at Texas Instruments can be freely shared or used in personal projects without review. This fails to recognize that even seemingly common knowledge might be derived from proprietary research or development, making its external use a violation of confidentiality agreements and potentially trade secret law. Another incorrect approach would be to use Texas Instruments' internal data or code snippets in a personal portfolio or open-source project without explicit permission. This directly infringes upon intellectual property rights and breaches contractual obligations, exposing both the employee and the company to legal action. Relying on informal advice from colleagues about what information is permissible to share is also an incorrect approach, as individual interpretations may not align with official company policy or legal requirements, leading to unintentional violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first consult their company's employee handbook and specific policies regarding intellectual property, confidentiality, and the use of company resources. If there is any ambiguity, the next step is to formally seek clarification from their direct manager or the legal/compliance department. Documenting all requests for clarification and approvals is essential. When considering external use of any information or skills acquired at Texas Instruments, a conservative approach is always best. If in doubt, do not use or share it without explicit written authorization. This systematic process ensures compliance with legal frameworks and ethical standards, safeguarding both personal career and the company's interests. Question 15. Strategic planning requires Texas Instruments to develop a new product roadmap that aims for significant market expansion. The product development team is considering several aggressive strategies to achieve this goal. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework governing the semiconductor industry in the United States, ensuring both commercial success and legal compliance? Option A. Develop the product roadmap by first conducting a comprehensive review of relevant U.S. federal antitrust laws, intellectual property regulations, and seeking expert legal counsel to ensure all proposed strategies are compliant and ethically sound. Option B. Prioritize aggressive market share acquisition through exclusive distribution agreements and rapid price adjustments, without explicit legal review of potential antitrust implications. Option C. Rely on informal industry discussions and past practices to guide the product strategy, assuming that common market approaches are inherently compliant with U.S. regulations. Option D. Focus on rapid product innovation and market entry, potentially leveraging publicly available technical information from competitors without conducting thorough patent landscape analysis or seeking legal advice on intellectual property rights. The correct answer is B. Prioritize aggressive market share acquisition through exclusive distribution agreements and rapid price adjustments, without explicit legal review of potential antitrust implications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas Instruments employee tasked with developing a new product strategy. The core difficulty lies in balancing aggressive market penetration goals with the imperative to adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing the semiconductor industry in the United States, specifically as it pertains to intellectual property and fair competition. Misinterpreting or overlooking these regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, financial penalties, and reputational damage for Texas Instruments. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the strategic plan is not only commercially viable, but also legally sound and ethically responsible. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of relevant U.S. federal regulations, including those enforced by the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, and the Department of Justice, DOJ, concerning antitrust laws and intellectual property rights. This includes understanding guidelines on patent licensing, trade secret protection, and prohibitions against monopolistic practices or unfair methods of competition. By prioritizing compliance and seeking legal counsel when ambiguities arise, the employee ensures that Texas Instruments' strategic planning is grounded in legal certainty, safeguarding the company from potential litigation and regulatory action. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to ethical business conduct and long-term sustainability. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on aggressive market share acquisition without considering regulatory implications is flawed because it risks violating antitrust laws, such as the Sherman Act or the Clayton Act, which prohibit practices that restrain trade or create monopolies. This could lead to investigations, fines, and injunctions that disrupt business operations. An approach that prioritizes rapid product development and market entry by potentially disregarding existing patent protections or trade secrets of competitors is also problematic. This could result in patent infringement lawsuits, costly settlements, or court-ordered sales bans, severely damaging Texas Instruments' financial standing and market position. An approach that relies on informal understandings or industry best practices without verifying their compliance with specific U.S. regulations is insufficient. While informal agreements might seem efficient, they can easily cross the line into anti-competitive behavior or violate disclosure requirements, leading to regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, clearly define the strategic objectives. Second, identify all applicable regulatory frameworks and legal requirements relevant to the industry and jurisdiction. In this case, U.S. federal regulations for the semiconductor industry. Third, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, evaluating potential legal and ethical pitfalls associated with each strategic option. Fourth, consult with legal counsel and compliance officers to validate the chosen strategy against regulatory standards. Finally, document the decision-making process and the rationale for the chosen strategy, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that a new feature being developed by Texas Instruments for its upcoming product line may involve the collection and processing of user data in a manner that could potentially fall under specific U.S. federal data privacy regulations. The product development team is eager to launch the feature to gain a competitive edge. Which of the following actions best represents the responsible and compliant approach for Texas Instruments? Option A. Prioritize the competitive advantage gained by an early launch and defer any detailed regulatory review until after the product has achieved significant market penetration. Option B. Proceed with the feature launch as planned, assuming that any potential regulatory issues can be addressed and remediate after the product is in the market. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed data collection and processing activities against all relevant U.S. federal data privacy laws and Texas Instruments' internal compliance policies before the feature is finalized and launched. Option D. Rely on the general understanding of data privacy principles that the product development team possesses, without undertaking a specific regulatory assessment for this new feature. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the feature launch as planned, assuming that any potential regulatory issues can be addressed and remediate after the product is in the market. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Texas Instruments to navigate a situation where a new product feature, while potentially beneficial for customers, might inadvertently create a compliance risk. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and market competitiveness with the absolute necessity of adhering to regulatory frameworks. Careful judgment is required to identify potential risks before they materialize into violations, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential regulatory gaps before product launch. This means conducting a thorough review of the proposed feature against all applicable Texas Instruments internal policies and relevant U.S. federal and state regulations governing the specific technology or data handling involved. This approach ensures that compliance is built into the product development lifecycle from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory adherence, which are paramount for a company like Texas Instruments operating in a highly regulated industry. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the feature launch without a comprehensive regulatory assessment would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a disregard for compliance obligations and exposes Texas Instruments to substantial risks. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on a general understanding of regulations without specific due diligence for the new feature, is also problematic. This can lead to overlooking nuanced requirements or misinterpreting the applicability of certain rules. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed to market over regulatory certainty, assuming that any issues can be addressed post-launch, is fundamentally flawed. This reactive stance is often too late to prevent violations and incurs greater costs and damage. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to product development. This involves identifying potential compliance touchpoints early, engaging with legal and compliance teams, and conducting thorough assessments tailored to the specific features and intended markets. A robust internal review process, including cross-functional collaboration, is essential to ensure that all regulatory considerations are addressed before a product or feature is released to the public. Question 17. Consider a scenario where a Texas Instruments engineer, who is responsible for evaluating and recommending new semiconductor manufacturing equipment, discovers that their sibling is a senior sales representative for a company that is a potential supplier of this critical equipment. The engineer has a close personal relationship with their sibling. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Texas Instruments engineer to take to uphold professional integrity and comply with company guidelines? Option A. Inform their sibling about the potential conflict and ask the sibling to withdraw their company's bid to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct manager and the company's ethics or compliance department, and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the evaluation and selection process of the equipment. Option C. Continue with the evaluation process as normal, ensuring they remain objective in their assessment, and only disclose the relationship if specifically asked about potential conflicts of interest. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation, but subtly favor the sibling's company's bid, believing that their sibling deserves a professional advantage due to their close relationship. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct manager and the company's ethics or compliance department, and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the evaluation and selection process of the equipment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Texas Instruments due to the inherent conflict between a personal relationship and the company's ethical obligations and potential regulatory compliance requirements. Maintaining objectivity and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety is paramount in such situations to uphold trust and integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate the delicate balance between personal connections and professional responsibilities, ensuring that company policies and ethical standards are not compromised. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate internal channels, such as HR or a designated ethics officer. This aligns with standard corporate governance principles and often reflects requirements under various regulatory frameworks that mandate disclosure of potential conflicts of interest. By proactively informing the company, the employee allows Texas Instruments to assess the situation, implement necessary safeguards, e.g., recusal from specific decisions, reassignment, and ensure compliance with any applicable laws or industry standards related to insider information or fair business practices. This approach prioritizes transparency, accountability, and the protection of the company's interests. An incorrect approach would be to remain silent about the relationship. This failure to disclose a potential conflict of interest can lead to serious regulatory violations if the relationship influences business decisions or leads to the improper disclosure of confidential information. Ethically, it breaches the duty of loyalty owed to the employer and erodes trust. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the conflict independently without informing the company. This is risky as the employee may not be aware of all potential implications or regulatory nuances, and it bypasses established internal controls designed to mitigate such risks. This can also be viewed as a deliberate attempt to circumvent company policy and ethical guidelines, potentially leading to disciplinary action and reputational damage for both the employee and Texas Instruments. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a proactive and transparent decision-making framework. This involves first identifying any potential conflicts of interest, no matter how minor they may seem. Second, they should consult company policies and relevant codes of conduct to understand specific disclosure requirements. Third, they must err on the side of caution by disclosing the situation to the appropriate authority within the organization. Finally, they should cooperate fully with any internal review or mitigation strategies implemented by the company. This systematic approach ensures that ethical standards are upheld and regulatory obligations are met, safeguarding both the individual's career and the company's integrity. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a hiring manager at Texas Instruments, responsible for overseeing a critical stage of the hiring assessment test for a software engineering role, discovers that one of the candidates being evaluated is a close personal friend. The manager is aware of the candidate's technical skills, but also recognizes the potential for unconscious bias. What is the most appropriate course of action for the hiring manager to ensure the integrity of the Texas Instruments hiring assessment test process? Option A. Discreetly provide the candidate with advanced information about the assessment's specific challenges or questions to help them perform better. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the HR department or designated hiring committee and request to be recused from any part of the candidate's assessment and evaluation process. Option C. Proceed with the evaluation, trusting personal objectivity to remain unbiased and focusing solely on the candidate's technical merit as demonstrated in the assessment. Option D. Evaluate the candidate as usual, but make a mental note to be slightly more critical in their assessment to compensate for the personal connection. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the evaluation, trusting personal objectivity to remain unbiased and focusing solely on the candidate's technical merit as demonstrated in the assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with ethical standards and company policies, specifically within the context of the Texas Instruments hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and fairness in the hiring process, while being aware of personal relationships that could influence judgment. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the assessment and the company's hiring practices. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate internal stakeholders, such as HR or a hiring manager, and recusal from any part of the hiring process that could be influenced by the personal connection. This upholds professional integrity by preventing even the appearance of impropriety. Ethically, it aligns with principles of fairness and impartiality, ensuring that all candidates are evaluated on merit. From a regulatory perspective, while specific Texas Instruments hiring assessment test regulations are not publicly detailed, general employment law and ethical business practices mandate avoiding conflicts of interest and ensuring fair hiring. Transparency and recusal are standard best practices to mitigate these risks and comply with implied ethical guidelines. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with evaluating the candidate without disclosure. Assuming personal objectivity, this fails to address the potential for unconscious bias and creates a significant ethical breach by not disclosing a material relationship that could impact the assessment. It also violates the principle of fairness to other candidates who do not have such a personal connection. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly favor the known candidate through biased questioning or evaluation criteria. This is a direct violation of ethical hiring practices and could lead to legal repercussions if discovered, as it undermines the integrity of the assessment process and potentially discriminates against other applicants. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the relationship and hope it doesn't influence the outcome. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and an unwillingness to proactively manage potential ethical conflicts, leaving the process vulnerable to bias and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, ethical conduct, and adherence to company policy. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step is to identify the nature of the relationship and its potential impact on the task at hand. The next step is to consult relevant company policies and ethical guidelines. If a conflict is identified, the professional should then proactively disclose the situation to the appropriate authority and seek guidance on how to proceed, which often involves recusal from decision-making roles. This systematic approach ensures that potential biases are managed, fairness is maintained, and the integrity of the process is preserved. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that a candidate for a role at Texas Instruments has presented a risk assessment that primarily focuses on identifying immediate, easily observable operational inefficiencies within a single department, without considering broader implications or potential future challenges. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment would be most aligned with the expectations of the Texas Instruments hiring assessment test, emphasizing a proactive and comprehensive understanding of potential threats? Option A. Identifying only the most obvious and immediate operational risks within the candidate's current team, assuming that addressing these will naturally resolve any larger issues. Option B. Conducting a thorough analysis of potential risks that could impact Texas Instruments' business objectives, reputation, and compliance, and proposing strategic mitigation plans for each identified risk. Option C. Presenting a risk assessment that highlights the company's strengths and minimizes any discussion of potential negative outcomes to project an image of unwavering success. Option D. Focusing exclusively on historical data to identify past problems, without considering emerging trends or novel risks that could affect Texas Instruments in the future. The correct answer is B. Conducting a thorough analysis of potential risks that could impact Texas Instruments' business objectives, reputation, and compliance, and proposing strategic mitigation plans for each identified risk. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a candidate to apply risk assessment principles within the specific context of a hiring process at Texas Instruments, adhering strictly to the guidelines of the Texas Instruments hiring assessment test. The core difficulty lies in identifying the most appropriate risk assessment approach that aligns with the test's implicit objectives, which likely focus on identifying candidates who can proactively manage potential issues in a corporate environment. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between superficial risk identification and a more robust, forward-looking assessment. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive evaluation of potential risks that could impact Texas Instruments' operations, reputation, or compliance, and then developing mitigation strategies. This aligns with best professional practice because it demonstrates an understanding of the interconnectedness of business functions and the importance of anticipating challenges. Ethically, it shows a commitment to responsible business conduct and safeguarding the company's interests. Regulatory justification, while not explicitly detailed in the prompt for this specific exam, would generally support such a diligent approach as a fiduciary duty to the employer. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate, obvious risks without considering their potential downstream effects is professionally unacceptable. This fails to demonstrate strategic thinking and a comprehensive understanding of risk management. It might also overlook subtle but significant threats. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore potential risks altogether due to a desire to present a purely positive outlook, is ethically unsound and professionally negligent. This approach fails to fulfill the duty of care to the employer and could lead to unforeseen negative consequences. A third incorrect approach, which is to overemphasize minor risks to the point of paralysis, is also professionally problematic as it can hinder progress and efficient decision-making, demonstrating a lack of balanced judgment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific context and objectives of the assessment. They should then identify potential risks, analyze their likelihood and impact, and prioritize them based on severity. Finally, they should consider appropriate mitigation or management strategies. This systematic process ensures that all relevant factors are considered and that the chosen approach is both effective and aligned with professional and ethical standards. Question 20. The analysis reveals that a new software development tool offers significant potential for streamlining Texas Instruments' product design process. However, before recommending its adoption, an engineer must assess its compliance with data handling and intellectual property protection standards. Which of the following approaches best ensures that Texas Instruments adheres to its regulatory obligations and internal policies? Option A. Proceed with the tool's implementation if it appears to meet the immediate functional requirements, deferring any detailed compliance checks to a later stage. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the software tool's data handling practices and compare them against Texas Instruments' internal data privacy and security policies, as well as relevant U.S. federal regulations. Option C. Prioritize the tool's reported efficiency gains and cost reduction, assuming that the vendor has already ensured compliance with all applicable laws. Option D. Rely on the vendor's marketing materials and general assurances that the tool is compliant with industry best practices without independent verification. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the software tool's data handling practices and compare them against Texas Instruments' internal data privacy and security policies, as well as relevant U.S. federal regulations. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas Instruments employee tasked with evaluating a new software development tool. The challenge lies in balancing the potential benefits of the tool against the critical need to comply with Texas Instruments' internal policies and relevant U.S. federal regulations concerning data privacy and intellectual property. Misjudging the compliance aspects could lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and financial penalties for Texas Instruments, as well as personal professional consequences for the employee. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any adoption of the tool adheres strictly to established legal and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the software tool's data handling practices against the Texas Instruments' internal data privacy and security policies, as well as relevant U.S. federal regulations such as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, if health-related data is involved, or the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, if user data under 13 is handled, and the general principles of the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which often influences broader U.S. data privacy considerations. This approach prioritizes due diligence, ensuring that the tool's functionalities do not inadvertently expose Texas Instruments to compliance risks. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible technology adoption and safeguarding sensitive information. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the tool's perceived efficiency and cost savings without a comprehensive compliance review fails to acknowledge the paramount importance of regulatory adherence. This oversight could lead to the adoption of a tool that violates data privacy laws, resulting in substantial fines and legal action against Texas Instruments. An approach that relies on the vendor's assurances without independent verification is also professionally unsound. While vendor representations are a starting point, they do not absolve Texas Instruments of its responsibility to ensure compliance. This could lead to a false sense of security and the undetected use of non-compliant software. An approach that assumes existing internal policies are sufficient without actively assessing how the new tool interacts with those policies is negligent. Policies are frameworks, and their application to novel technologies requires specific evaluation to identify potential gaps or conflicts that the new tool might exploit or create. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Texas Instruments should adopt a risk-based approach to evaluating new technologies. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks, including regulatory noncompliance, data breaches, and intellectual property infringement. 2. Assessing the likelihood and impact of these risks. 3. Implementing controls to mitigate identified risks. In this context, the primary control is a thorough compliance review against established internal policies and applicable U.S. federal and state regulations. When in doubt, consulting with legal and compliance departments is a crucial step in the decision-making process.